Hi, I'm Betsy, a Lubbock Master Gardener and friend of the Public Library. And this is another program of gardening tips for Lubbock. One of the best ways to figure out what to grow in your garden is to look at the gardens already existing in Lubbock. And that way you can see what kind of plants grow in this area and how long it takes for them and how they look at the different seasons of the year. So today we're going to look at the Lubbock Arboretum. The Arboretum is at 41st and University, and the cars whizzing by on University sometimes don't even realize that this treasure is hidden behind the mature trees. But today we're going to meet with John Wallace, the president of the Arboretum Foundation Board, and he'll show us around the Arboretum. John, it's so good to see you this morning. John's the president of the board here at the Arboretum, and he's going to show us a little bit around the garden. I'm really eager to hear about how the Arboretum got started and why is it called the Memorial Arboretum?
Well, I'll answer that. Betsy, it's great to have you all out here. We always appreciate people coming to the Arboretum and publicizing it. The reason it's called the Memorial Arboretum is when it was founded back in the early 1960s. The idea was that a lot of the trees and plants would be provided by the people of Lubbock as memorials, typically for their loved ones who had passed away. And we still have that program. And you'll notice a lot of the trees out here have small plaques or designations of some kind that they're in memory of.
Okay.
And that's the reason we call it the Memorial Arboretum. I will say that I think the Arboretum may be, I think some people refer to the hidden treasures of Lubbock. Typically people drive up and down the road here. University is right behind us. We front on University Avenue, and I've had people tell me I drive to work here this way every day and I never knew it was here. So if you have never been to the Arboretum, or if you've driven by and wondered what it is, pull off University safely, of course, and pull into our parking lot. We're right across the parking lot from the Hodges Community Center, and take a tour. We do have the fenced enclosed portion of the Arboretum, which has handicap access paths. So you're welcome to come out here. Many people do. They take a walk in the morning or come here at lunch and eat in our gazebo. So all those activities are available. Some people picnic out here. Now you should be aware, and many people are not, that the Arboretum encompasses a much larger area than just what's enclosed by our fence.
Okay.
For instance, up behind the Hodges Community Center, we have the Hodges Rose Garden, which we maintain. And that was renovated and developed by a Rosarian who's also a master gardener from Crest, and that was about 2010. Then we have many other gardens that were developed in past years that are outside the fence. Some of them are in a little better condition than others, but we have a lot of land out here. About 90 acres, some of it, about 7 acres, is enclosed by the fence. So you can see that there's a much larger area than just the area enclosed by the fence. Also, we have a playa lake at the rear of the Arboretum, which years ago was designated as a wildlife refuge.
There's a house right behind us.
Okay.
And I know that you do some kind of programming there in the house as well.
Right. This we call our interpretive center. This brick farmhouse, I believe, was built back in the 1940s. This was all a cotton farm at one time. After the family that lived in here moved out and sold this land to the city had their manager of the Garden and Arts Center live with their family in this house. Then once she retired, the city used it as a guest house for visitors to the city. And then when they stopped doing that, it became the Arboretum Foundation's Interpretive Center. At one time, originally we were housed in the Garden and Arts Center, and then we moved up here in the 1980s.
That's a great introduction. I'm eager to see part of this. How many, did you say 7 acres inside?
Approximately. I'd have
Yes.
to double check on that, but it's approximately that much. We have over 115 different varieties of shrubs and trees here, not counting all the annuals and perennials that are planted here.
Well, let's go see some of it. John, you've brought us to the sensory garden. I see the sign here. Tell us about this garden.
Betsy, the sensory garden, originally called the Garden of the Senses, was established in the early days of the Arboretum, and then later also was developed with the aid of the local Lions Club. The purpose of the sensory garden, or Garden of the Senses, is to come in and allow you to have a sensory experience with the plants using the 5 senses. So we have a variety of different plants in here that change seasonally. Right now in front of us here we have some butterfly gara. People often want to know what kind of vines these are. These are purple hyacinth bean vines. A lot of people like those. And of course we have some blanket flower, or gaillardia. And over here is a popular plant in Lubbock in West Texas, which is a mealy salvia, or a salvia farinaceae is the botanical term. We have many other plants in here to give a variety to the senses. In the back we even have some okra and pepper plants growing.
And so these are mostly certainly things to see. Tell us a little bit about the smell and the touch parts of this garden.
Well, the smell would be any of these flowers.
I guess
that,
the flowers
that give
would
off
have a
an odor.
smell.
Yeah.
I see a
it's
few
typical.
herbs, I think, too.
Yes, we have some herbs in here for tasting. Of course, you got to be careful what you taste. We have that in here, and the plants have different textures. Some of them are quite soft, and some of them are a little not as soft, I would put it that way, and some of them are fuzzy, and they have a fuzzy feel to them. So we just have a variety of plant textures in here that you can touch.
That's great. John, as we were walking to this garden, you mentioned that some of the trees that are here are probably 50 or 60 years old, and those are probably the mature trees that people see when they drive up University.
That's right. Lubbock is a relatively young city. People may not realize that many of these trees have been here a long time. Even a few of the old elm trees were established here before the Arboretum was established in the early 1960s. And the Arboretum has had an active tree planting program over the several decades that they've been in operation. So we have a large variety of different types of trees and shrubs, about 115 that we have listed, and they can vary a lot, of course, from a lot of oaks. We have a lot of conifers, including pines. We have everything from a jujube tree back in the back, which is known as a Chinese date tree. We have a lot of elms and ashes. Recently, we just planted over here behind you, Betsy, 2 prairie flame leaf sumacs that are blooming now. Those trees were planted with the assistance of a grant from the Chapman Forestry Foundation. That's something the Arboretum Foundation does, is secure grants for the development of the Arboretum, providing us funding beyond what we can realize from donations. But we always depend upon donations. The Arboretum Foundation is a nonprofit 501c3 foundation established for tax-deductible purposes for donors.
And then you also, I think, rely on volunteers to come and help work in the garden. Is that restricted to people who are members of the Arboretum?
No, anyone can volunteer. And you think of this as a backyard. It's a huge backyard. And you think about the amount of gardening and lawn work and things that you do on your property will magnify it probably 100 times out here. And there's always things to do out here at the Arboretum because it's a dynamic environment. You have
some regular volunteer days, don't you?
We typically have Wednesday mornings. That was established many years ago for the Wednesday Wonders. So we have people that come out on Wednesday mornings and work, or when it gets cold, they do it on Wednesday afternoon. We also have a lot of volunteer events on Saturday. We have a lot of groups now from Tech. They had to take a break when Tech was closed in the spring, but they're coming back now. So we have a lot of tech students organizations. I think we had as many as 14 organizations volunteer out here last year.
That sounds great. And that also seems to me to be a good opportunity for gardeners in Lubbock who are just trying to figure out what to do in their own yards. They could come out here and work with the volunteers and learn more about the plants for Lubbock.
Besides the beautification of Clapp Park, another purpose for the founding of the Arboretum was to develop a suite or a series of plants that gardeners could come look at, and it helps them envision what the plants might look like in their own landscape. They might determine that a deodar cedar is too big to grow in most city lots here in Lubbock, so they can kind of get an idea of the size and also how well certain plants do in the Lubbock environment. We experiment. A lot of times we obtain plants that don't do all that well, and we do that for the reason of experimentation to find out what plants are well adapted to the Lubbock climate and environment.
That sounds great. Well, why don't you show us another special spot? You've brought us to the Wildflower Garden, and tell us what's happening here.
Just give you a little background about why the Wildflower Garden is here and the shape it is in. It was originally established as a casting pond for people to come out and practice with their fishing rods out here. Well, back in the 80s, I think the city decided that wasn't a good idea anymore, so they filled it in, and we created the perennial garden, which then evolved into the Wildflower Garden, which it's about 10,000 square feet, so about 1/4 of an acre in extent.
Okay.
So that requires quite a bit of gardening effort on the part of our volunteers to maintain this. So last year we decided we were going to try to develop it a little differently, and we put down plastic and solarized the beds to help retard weeds. And of course, a weed is just a plant that's growing in the wrong place.
Right.
And we had lots of those plants growing in the wrong place out here. So then in the fall and this summer, we've planted in the 2 center parts, which are reserved for perennials, and we've planted about 300 perennial plants right now to get them established before winter, and we've got about 300 more to go. So these 2 beds here and some of the outlying beds will contain a total, I guess it's more like 300 or 670 when we get finished. Just briefly note that this was made possible by a grant from the High Plains Water District.
Okay.
They generously approved our grant application and are providing the funding for this, so we want to give them a shout out.
And what are the perennials that you're planting at this time of year?
We have a large variety of plantings. I think it's around 40 in here. Some of the plants we currently have recently planted are everything from daylilies there in the background. We have a lot of dianthus or firewitch here that's blooming. A lot of people like that.
With those little pink blossoms.
With the little pink blossoms. Some more salvias over here. Behind me we have sedums.
With the blue. Here's some sedums, yes.
And with the pink blossoms or reddish pink, these are actually fairly water-wise plants. They're fairly drought tolerant. That's one thing we're aiming for here in the garden, is to convert it or transform it into plants that are well adapted to the Lubbock environment, which means most critically they need to be drought tolerant and heat tolerant.
I noticed also that you've got a great irrigation system set up here. I see the tubing. How often do you have to water these plants?
Currently we have it set to run twice a week. In the winter we reduce it to once a week. This drip system was installed about 10 years ago. That's something else that requires maintenance, because the squirrels love to chew holes in it so they can get water.
You also mentioned as we were walking over here that there's a Facebook page about the Arboretum and maybe a website. Tell us what can we find there?
Well, on the Arboretum website, which is more static than our Facebook page, of course it's a little more difficult to post things on there. We have a history of the Arboretum, and we also have other information on there. If you're looking for current events and things like that, and posts that we put on Facebook about the development of the gardens out here and volunteer events, things, that's where I would go, as our Facebook page, because we try to post things several times a week to keep the public informed and allow them to know what's going on at the Arboretum.
I saw some Facebook photos of the volunteers who were out here planting all these new wildflower plants. So I could see how you keep us all up to date with the Facebook page.
And that brings up a good point. Many people don't realize that the Arboretum Foundation is all volunteer organization. We have no paid employees. The city does not come out and plant, with the exception of trees, things like that. The city owns the park. The foundation provides plants and gardening work to maintain and develop the Arboretum. So we do depend completely on volunteers.
That's great. Good to know. Well, we need to go see the rose garden too. There's a special rose garden here, so let's go there next.
Great.
You've brought us to the rose garden now. I noticed the sign says it's a memorial rose garden, and I want you to tell us a little bit about the rose garden.
Okay, well, it's been here at least 50 years, maybe longer. So the Hodges Rose Garden, some people may not realize it's here because it's kind of sequestered by, you got fence on one side and you've got a number of shrub plantings and trees. So many people are not aware it's directly behind the Hodges Community Center. This was renovated about 2010. We put a lot of what are called earth kind roses here, which were developed by Texas A&M Ag Extension Service to be more environmentally friendly than some varieties of rose. We have both rose bushes and a larger shrub rose in the back, a number of different varieties here.
I tend to think of roses growing in a place where there's a lot more moisture than there is here in Lubbock, but obviously the roses are thriving here. Is that because they're earth kind roses, or
it is, and roses are basically drought tolerant.
Are they? Okay, that's good to know.
They're climbing or shrub type. What many people don't realize is the thorns on a rose are actually a leaf that has a specialized growth to it to become thorn-like.
Interesting.
So yeah, I'm not sure that we have any thornless roses. I think they all have thorns, at least the ones I've encountered.
And when is the peak bloom time for the roses? It's obviously not right now.
Right. Our roses start usually blooming in late April, early May, and they'll bloom fairly well up until July when the really hot weather sets in. And then of course now here in the fall they're starting to go dormant, and of course as part of their cycle roses develop rose hips, which are the seeds after the blooms are going dormant.
Well, thank you so much for giving us the tour of the Arboretum. And of course, a big question at this time of year is there going to be a pumpkin trail this year at the Arboretum? Tell us about that.
We weren't sure, but last week the city published their fall activity and recreation guide for the parks here in Lubbock, and they did list the pumpkin trail.
So people donate carved pumpkins and bring them here to line the paths of the Arboretum. And then when is the trail open? When can people come and walk the trail?
It usually starts on Thursday. I believe it's the 22nd of October this year, but I have to check my calendar to make sure. And usually it runs through Sunday evening. Now that's one thing that's tricky about the pumpkin trail. If they bring their pumpkins too early and we have a warm October, a lot of those pumpkins are kind of past going by the time the trail gets here, and by the weekend they're a little soupy.
Okay, so we need to keep watching your Facebook page and figure out about the pumpkin trail.
Well, and I would also watch the Parks Department because they're the ones that really sponsor this.
Okay.
And they'll have announcements, and a lot of the charitable organizations and other organizations around town will have actual exhibits and displays beyond the pumpkins that are lining the trail.
Good. John, thanks so much for showing us around the Arboretum and telling us about it. And I do hope that Lubbock gardeners got some good ideas from the Arboretum. I hope you'll come and visit, and we'll look forward to talking to you again with more gardening tips for Lubbock.